Alright guys, welcome. Here we go. We got another video lesson coming up. So let's get started. Today we are finally going to get into the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention specifically. That's what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about that Comic-Con for Liberty that we were talking about last week. One of the things that caused this, right, was Shays Rebellion. So let's get into it. Objective really quick. Explain the differing ideological positions and on the structure and function of the federal government. So we're going to talk about how the federal government was formed, how it was designed, the changes. A couple of terms up there, and of course, big brain question of the day. What are some issues from the Constitutional Convention that will still be around after the new government is formed? So after we get a constitution, what are some of the issues? Keep those in mind. They will help you later. Um, Articles of Confederation. Quick, brief, really fast review of them, right? Bunch of weaknesses, no executive branch, no federal courts, couldn't tax, couldn't regulate trade, couldn't do anything except what? They had the Northwest Ordinance, which allowed new states to enter the Union. So let's move on. So we already got title, we already got that. First key point, delegates. Now, I'm at the school now, by the way, guys, so that way there might be some bells periodically. Delegates from the states participated in the Constitutional Convention. We know this. Through negotiation, collaboration, and compromise, big deal, really important, they proposed a new constitution, a new government. So let's get into why and how. If you need time on any of these slides, pause as I finish so you can move on and write in your notes. So there's a whole big wall of text up here. You do not need to access and use the entire big wall of text. In fact, I would probably prefer if you didn't paraphrase, listen to what I'm talking about as you go through and move from there. So everybody shows up to this convention except for Rhode Island. Rhode Island's a little mad. They want the articles to stay the way they are because it lets Rhode Island do whatever Rhode Island wants. So they boycott. So basically, you could just put all the states show up except Rhode Island. Most of the states' delegates want to fix the articles because, again, under the articles, all the states are basically like their own little tiny countries that are really good friends. And a lot of states enjoyed that. But there will be a problem. A guy named James Madison will create a plan, a great plan, and he will basically have the blueprint to the Constitution kind of already done, right? So James Madison, and write this in, is the father of the U.S. Constitution. He's the guy that made it up. And if y'all were in the classroom right now, I'd probably pull off my Constitution from the wall and show it to y'all. But just note that James Madison's the father of the Constitution. So let's get into this. There is one big issue, though, and that is the issue of representation. There's two plans, two ideas. One is the Virginia plan. It's a bicameral house, but both houses are based on population. Why is it called the Virginia plan? Well, because big states favored the Virginia plan because big states had bigger populations, and Virginia was the big state of the time. The next plan is the New Jersey plan. Smaller states favored this plan because it's about one house. It's a single unilateral house of legislation, and it was equal representation. So a lot like the Articles government, every state got the same number of representatives. So smaller states like it, hence New Jersey plan. Pause if you need it. You need to break these down. You need both these plans in there. Now, we went with neither plan, but the government did something that is a lot harder to do now than it was then, you could say. Something that maybe we should have more of now than we did then. They compromised. So, there was a great compromise made. And basically, what happens is there's a deal made, and both of the groups decide, well, why don't we have a two-house legislature, kind of like the Virginia plan, but one's based on population, the House of Representatives is what it will be called, right? Congress. And the other is based on equal representation, and that would be the Senate, right? Every state gets the same number of representatives. So every state has 2 senators, and then they decide how many Congress people they have based on the population, right? However many congressmen and or women. That's the great compromise. So after you got your Virginia plan, New Jersey plan on the bottom, great compromise, one house that's equal, one house that's based on population. That's all you need to know. Let's move forward. Key point 2. Constitutional Convention compromised over representation of slave states in Congress. So, The role of the federal government in regulating slavery and the slave trade allowed the prohibition of the international slave trade in 1808. So let's get into some of this stuff. First of all, they think they have a great plan, right? Oh, we got this, right? One house is equal, one house is not. But the problem is slave states bring up the issue, and all states did, to be fair, about how will slaves be counted towards representation. Now, mind you, these slaves don't get a vote, much like how poor white people didn't get votes who didn't own land. So these slaves definitely weren't going to get a vote. But the slaveholders wanted that to count towards their population. Well, why? There's a few reasons for that. Again, do not write everything word per word. Make sure that you are getting the important info only. Determining the population of a state determines how many representatives you get, even though it's only in one house. More representatives, your voice is bigger. If your voice is bigger, you get to pass the laws you want. In fact, I would recommend getting the part on that second slide right here. There it is, right here. Get this bullet, this second bullet, right? This is a pretty good one. More representation leads to more votes, which leads to you getting the laws you want made. This could have serious repercussions for the nation. So delegates wanted to make sure this was as fair for them as possible. Again, when we talk about fairness, when we talk about equality, and it's the 1780s, keep in mind that their definition of fairness and equality is not the same as ours. So that's important to note. They wanted to come up with something that was fair for them. Something that would even, something that would work. So, they established something called the 3/5 Compromise. This is in the Constitution. This is in your Constitution. The government that you follow, the government that gives you the same freedoms that you get to enjoy now, has this written in it, which basically states that all other persons, Constitution doesn't use the word slavery until it abolishes it in the 14th Amendment, will count as 3/5 of one person. One person being one white person, other persons being slaves. And that is how they count towards representation for voting. So that's the 3/5 Compromise. You need this term down. Just something to keep in mind. We're going to move forward. But if there is one positive, and I would argue that it's hard to find a positive in something that was initially wrong to begin with, something that's evil to begin with, but if there's one positive of this whole meeting, it is that the international slave trade will end. So the Atlantic slave trade, the Triangle trade, the Middle Passage, all that stuff will end by 1808. They'll come up with a deal in 1807. It will lead to the end of the Atlantic slave trade, but January 1st, 1808, bam, done. This doesn't end slavery. By any means, slavery is not over. But what it does is it prevents the importation of slaves from other places, specifically, directly from Africa. And from this point, 1808 forward, all of the slaves in the United States are from the United States. Not to make it better, just something to keep in mind. So when we're fighting the Civil War in about 60 years, and it's over slavery, actually 55, right? The slaves are all going to be from the United States. These are all American slaves. There's no more slaves that are imported from Africa by the time you get to the 60s when we're fighting the Civil War, 1860s. So just keep that in mind. We're going to move forward. Key point 3. In the debate over agreeing whether or not to ratify the Constitution, anti-federalists opposing ratification will battle with federalists who are for ratification. That should say for, not for. So, on your paper, on your notes, make a T-chart like that. It can be a T-chart. It doesn't have to be like a big box or anything. Just T-chart. But make one. Federalist, anti-federalist. And we're going to go through them group by group. All right. First, let's talk about the Federalists. Federalists support the ratification. Federalists are for the Constitution. Hamilton was a Federalist. He loved the Constitution. They wanted it as is. They wanted no changes. They didn't want it to be weakened or strengthened. They wanted it as is. Good, strong federal government. Their beliefs were put into something called the Federalist Papers. Federalist Papers were very organized, very well written, very convincing arguments as to why we needed a constitution. They're well organized and they're really good at convincing the people, right? And if you remember the song, right? Hamilton wrote 50-some essays. Madison helped write a bunch. John Jay wrote a couple. I think he wrote like 4. So the Federalists and the Federalist Papers, their whole argument is, yes, we need a constitution. Keep it. We need one. Well, now you have the anti-Federalists. Again, Americans are bad at naming things. And the anti-Federalists are against ratification of the Constitution because it makes the government too strong, right? Patrick Henry, the give me liberty, give me death guy, is one of them. So is Sam Adams. However, these guys want... Basically what they want is individual rights to be protected. They want to know that they will be safe from the mean government because they just finished fighting a mean tyrannical government and they barely won that. So a couple of their leaders tried to write the anti-Federalist Papers, but they're kind of a joke. No one takes them seriously. They're not as well organized. They don't get their job done. The Federalist Papers are much better. But they do kind of make a demand. They make enough of a splash to where, hey, we're not going to get this Constitution ratified unless we do something. And that something, actually, let's talk about the Federalist Papers real quick. This is for your key term. Make sure you get it down. Collection of 85 essays promoting ratification, mainly written by Hamilton and Madison. You can include Jay if you want. So, what's the thing that's going to make the Constitution pass if all these darn anti-Federalists are trying to say, no, it won't pass, it's not fair? They ensured that the Constitution would be ratified by promising, and they being the Federalists, that a Bill of Rights will be included. And what does a Bill of Rights do? It protects the rights of the people, the rights of you, the rights of me, the rights of everybody. Bill of Rights protects individual rights. Explicitly, this is important, this Bill of Rights, this document, is specifically designed to limit the power of the government. It's specifically designed to limit the power of the federal government. And it's a compromise. The Federalists have to say, we really need a constitution. Our government's falling apart. Fine, we'll protect individual rights. Yes, of course. And that's where the Bill of Rights kind of comes from. So let's move on. Again, if you needed any of these slides, you should have paused. 10 parts to the Bill of Rights. We won't spend too much time on them now, but they're pretty important. 10 amendments, changes to the Constitution. And these amendments protect individual rights. I've already said that, I know, but it's just something to keep in mind. First one, super important one, free speech, free religion, freedom of the press, assembly, petition, all that good stuff. Second one, very controversial, rights to bear arms, keep and bear arms. Third one, no quartering of soldiers. By the way, several of these are directly tied to the grievances of the Declaration of Independence. A lot of them are the same. It's like guarantees that the American government can't do what the British government did to them. So no quartering of soldiers, no search and seizures without a warrant, right? It's the fourth. The fifth one, the Fifth Amendment's kind of not a weird one, but it's a very unique one in that it's all of the rights you get as a someone who's accused of a crime. It's called due process, right? So the right to due process. When you're accused of a crime, there are certain rights that you're entitled to. That's what the Fifth Amendment is. And then you've got the Sixth Amendment, right, which is a right to a trial. Then the Seventh Amendment, a speedy trial, right, speedy trial. Seventh Amendment, trial by jury, civil cases. Number 8, super important. Number 8 is limitations on bail, punishments, and crime. So number 8 is like the limits of your punishment. No excessive punishments or fines or anything like that, right? No cruel and unusual punishment. Number 9 is the rights of the people. What does that mean? That means that number 9 is really cool. Number 9 might be my favorite one. Because what number 9 basically says is it says the rights of the people, like it's basically insurance. It says just because we in 1787 didn't think of this right doesn't mean it's not yours. Right? So the rights that are not explicitly given are still yours to have. Rights that we didn't come up with are still yours. Whereas, and the 10th Amendment is very similar. Powers that are not explicitly given to the federal are returned to the states. So the states get to keep powers that the federal government doesn't. Lastly, exit ticket. This is in Google Classroom. Identify and explain the major issues at the Constitutional Convention. There were 2. identify the two groups of the Constitutional Convention. Again, there were two. And describe the Bill of Rights. So that's it for me, guys. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see y'all next time.